Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and thank you very much for joining me here again today. Last week we spoke about the case of Jaco van Deventer, how he went to work one day and ended up being kidnapped and then to not seeing his family for over 6 years. So if you have not seen that video, I'll link it up here for you. Today's case is quite the long one, so get something to eat, get something to drink. I'm not going to waffle too much in the beginning because we need to jump straight into this case. South Africa is an incredibly beautiful place with beautiful rivers, mountains, and people. However, in such a beautiful place that many of us call home, it can be incredibly deadly as well. But with that being said, let's get into today's case.
Intended for mature audiences only.
Charlene Jooste grew up in Stellenbosch in the Western Cape. She was the oldest of 6 children. She had 3 brothers, and her 2 sisters were twins. Because Charlene was the oldest sibling, she looked after her siblings and became one of their closest confidants. She was very close to them even when they grew up and became adults. They would often call her, talk to her, ask for advice, and she was always there to lend a helping hand. Charlene continued as an adult to care for those around her, and when she left school, she then joined the South African Police Services, or also known as SAPS. Here she became an officer, but she quickly earned the respect of her co-workers, and she worked incredibly hard to be promoted to the intelligence unit within a couple of years. Then she would eventually serve as the station commander in a small town called Elim. Elim is a small village within the Western Cape, around 2 hours from Stellenbosch. This town was first established in 1824 by German missionaries as a missionary station. During Charlene's time at the South African Police Services, Charlene would then marry and have 2 children. Her firstborn is named Ethan, and he was born in the 1990s, with her second child, Nathan, then being born in 2002. Sadly, after Nathan's birth, things started to go a bit south in her relationship with her husband, and eventually her and her husband got divorced. This all happened in Charlene's early 20s, so the boys and Charlene lived together on their own for quite a while. Charlene, being a young mom of 2, often had it quite tough. She had to feed and school the 2 young boys and play both roles in order to be the best parent she could be. One day, when Charlene was busy pottering around in the garden, she then made eye contact with a young man who was on top of her neighbor's roof, busy rethatching the roof. And this young man that she locked eyes with's name is Ashley October. Ashley was at least 10 years younger than Charlene, but she thought that he looked very tough and handsome and rugged, and she immediately loved the look of this younger man. So soon after Charlene and Ashley started to date, it sadly became very apparent that this young-looking Prince Charming was not exactly the prince that she was looking for. He was incredibly strict with her children. He was very forceful with Charlene in terms of telling her what to do, making sure she did it to the way he liked, and he was often quite physically abusive, allegedly. And Charlene would often come to work with bruises all over her arms and around her body. But when she worked at the police station, her colleagues knew her very well. They knew her in different types of scenarios, working in the field, doing training. So they knew exactly what their bodies were put through every day. And Charlene would bruise on the job. So they would notice that Charlene would bruise easily, but they did notice that these bruises were in specific places and around certain parts of her body most often. So they had an inkling of what was going on, but this is their commander. This is someone at a very high rank, and they couldn't really go and ask their commander, we know what's happening at home, tell us what's happening. So it wasn't really confirmed if they knew. However, they had suspicions of what was happening at home. And yes, Charlene was quite highly ranked in the police services, and she worked on cases where she knew exactly where little domestic fights would happen, where they could lead to, and also what happened to many men and women who were in abusive relationships. She knew quite often what the outcome was, sadly, to some of these men and women, and she wasn't ignorant to that fact. She was just incredibly in love with Ashley. It could have been maybe that she thought she could change him, or maybe she thought that he was just different to these guys that she saw at the crime scene some of the time. And also with Ashley, some of the times he would be incredibly kind, then he would be incredibly hurtful. So it was constantly like she was looking for that affirmation, allegedly. So when Ashley was kind, she held on to that and tried to always rekindle that kindness in Ashley. But then in 2008, Charlene became pregnant. And then she gave birth to her and Ashley's first child together. And because of having this baby together, Ashley and Charlene felt that they should get married. And then they arranged a small wedding ceremony. However, the night before their wedding, one of Charlene's sisters, Alexa, which is one of the twins, sat Charlene down and she said, listen, you still have time. You can still get out of this. Is this something you want to do? We can leave right now. You don't have to marry this man just because you had a baby with him. But Charlene allegedly had already hyped herself up. She knew that she was going to marry this man. She loved Ashley. So the next day, they ended up getting married. So after Charlene and Ashley ended up getting married, they then moved into Ashley's house in Elim. And remember when we first introduced Elim as an area, it was set up originally in 1849, I think it was, and originally as a missionary area. So this area was very religious, and a lot of the people that Ashley and Charlene knew were religious, and it seems like they were as well. However, the property that Ashley lived on, in some of the articles that I read, it seemed like he lived on a church estate or property that was owned by the church. And how Ashley managed to get this or how it was linked, I'm not quite sure. Obviously, the marriage did not fix Charlene and Ashley's relationship in terms of the abuse. And Charlene tried really hard to protect her children. She would really try and shelter them from whatever Ashley was doing. She would make sure that they didn't know what was happening, or at least would not see it very often, and she would protect them from harm as well. So Charlene definitely took the brunt of it most of the time. And then in 2011, Charlene and Ashley had another child together. Ashley also had his own roof thatching business, and he would employ other people to work for him in this business. So in order to get further into this case, like I said, it's quite a long one, so we need to kind of just get straight into it and speak about exactly what happened. So like I said, Ashley owned this roof thatching business, and he would hire people to work for him. However, as we go further into the case, it was clear that Ashley had a MO of who he would ask specific questions about, and those questions we'll get into. And I say MO because the men that Ashley would ask to do horrendous crimes to his wife, they were all either suffering from substance abuse, money issues, or they had a rage addiction at that point. So, like I said, near the end of 2011, Ashley and one of his employees were working on site. Ashley then pulls one of these guys aside and says, so I just want to talk to you about something. My wife and I actually have life insurance policies out on each other. So I want you to kill my wife and I will give you 40,000 Rand worth of that life insurance policy. So if we take a step back, this is near the end of 2011. Charlene had just given birth to their child near the beginning of 2011. So she still had this newborn baby with Ashley. And while him and one of his employees were at a dump getting rid of some of the work waste that they had been using, he then asked this man to kill his wife. And this man that he asked is named also Ashley, but Ashley Kerr. So both of these Ashleys are talking, and this is what he just asked his employee. Now, when I was speaking about the MO, Ashley was currently battling some substance abuse issues, and this money would have been really appealing to him. Like, it would have helped him quite a lot. It's a lot of money. But Ashley said to his boss that he's not going to do it. As much as this money is appealing to him, he's not going to murder his wife for him. So boss Ashley, or Ashley October, he then backed off from ever asking his employee Ashley again. They kind of just stopped talking about it. It was a bit awkward. And his employee Ashley would go and tell other people in Elim about his conversation with his boss. But no one ever thought to go and talk to Charlene about this. They just didn't tell her. So then, in the same year, one of his other employees named Reagan, Ashley and Reagan are having the conversation, and Ashley then brings it up again. You know, my wife and I have life insurance policies out on each other. How about you go and kill my wife, Charlene, and I will give you 40,000 Rand of this life insurance money. And these two were having this conversation while they were actually hundreds of kilometers away from Ashley's home in Elim. They were actually on a business trip. They were working at a site quite far away, so they ended up sleeping over that night in this area. And the crickets are chirping outside. Everyone is getting still because it's late at night now. And Ashley brings up the scenario about how he wants his employee, Reagan, to murder his wife. And Ashley kept going on saying that we can make it look like it was a robbery. You go and you take whatever you want and you just murder her, and then we make that also look like a suicide. So no one is ever then to blame for the murder. So at first Reagan thought that Ashley was joking because this is the weirdest conversation he's ever had. So the two then left it that night. Ashley didn't speak about it again, and they continued their work the next morning and then went home shortly afterwards. So a couple days then go by and Reagan is still doing his job. He's coming to work every day, and then Ashley comes stomping towards him and he's like, why hasn't this been done? Why have you not murdered Charlene yet? And Reagan thought that it was a joke. He didn't think that Ashley was serious about it. But the anger that Ashley came towards him with, Reagan almost thought now like he has to do this because firstly, he needs the money. He thought that his job was on the line because of the rage that Ashley put towards him allegedly. And also Reagan was suffering from some kind of substance abuse or money issues. So this money also was incredibly appealing. But what was different with the situation was that Reagan felt like it was almost kill or be killed. He thought that if he doesn't kill Charlene, he's going to lose everything and he really needs this money. So then, on the 30th of July 2012, as dusk fell on Elim, Reagan climbed through a window that Ashley said would be open. Reagan then hid in the house for hours until 3 a.m. when he then had enough courage to leave his hiding place. He then crept through the house in utter darkness and walked towards the bedroom where Charlene was sleeping. As Reagan entered the bedroom, he then realized that Charlene was not alone and that she was sleeping with one of her younger children. Reagan then panicked and he immediately left the home because he didn't want to be a part of this anymore. He realized exactly what he was doing, and because there was a young child there, he immediately left the scene and never spoke to Ashley again about it. So this was really eating Reagan up, and about a month later in 2012, there was a knock on Charlene's door, and when she opened it, it was Reagan and his father. She then invited them in, and Reagan then blurted out that her husband, Ashley, October, was trying to murder her, and this is exactly what he did. This is what he expected me to do. This is how much he wanted to pay me. I got in through that window. He told her everything. And all that was really going through Charlene's mind was there was a man literally by my bed a month ago while I slept. And she felt scared that her husband was trying to kill her. But it was almost instantly that her officer brain kicked in and she thought, right, I need to get this sorted. I need as much evidence as I can. So she then asked Reagan, can you come with me to the police station to file a report on this so that we can open a case? And Reagan was more than happy to oblige. He then went with her the next day. They sat there, they opened a docket, and they started a case on Ashley October. So remember, Charlene was one of the highest officers in this police station, and she clearly had rank. But by 2015, nothing had been done, and they weren't going to take this case further because the police who were working on this case, because obviously it couldn't be Charlene, she was involved, the other police who were involved in this case or tried to take it on said that they didn't have enough evidence, so it was not going to be taken further. But by the news of 2015, when Charlene knew that this case wasn't going to go anywhere, she set up for divorce and she finalized the divorce that year. So because of this, Charlene was absolutely traumatized. She was terrified and she now lived alone with young children and she was scared. But years went by and Charlene made no contact with Ashley anymore. She didn't want to be anywhere near him. But as the kids started to grow up, Charlene started to slightly feel different about her ex-husband. Charlene maybe thought that because her children are older, they do need a relationship with their father. So she slowly started to communicate with Ashley again, and she tried to build this bridge back together, but in very, very small baby steps. She wasn't trusting him. She was making sure that he was working for everything, but she did open that communication barrier again. So in December of 2020, Charlene and Ashley started to become friendly again. But then, because of the pandemic, Ashley was unable to work and he took very large financial strain. But also, to make more money, Charlene, during the pandemic, would sell takeaways out of her home or food for people to collect on their way from work. So because Charlene was selling food out of the home, on one of the visits that Ashley went to Charlene's house, he said that because one of her children have moved out of the house, can he not use that bedroom as a tuck shop or a corner store so that people could go there and get bits and bobs on their way home, like milk, bread, sweet, that kind of thing. And Charlene thought that, okay, well, if you're going to use this room, you can pay me rent. So she saw it as more of a business transaction, but now these two were going to be in close proximity every day. And because she hadn't communicated with Ashley for years, they were amicable. They worked kind of well together, and they obviously had a past romantic relationship. And because of this, Charlene gave him far more access to her home than she probably would have a decade or so ago. Now, obviously, upon hearing this, Charlene's family were very annoyed and quite upset that she was letting Ashley back into the home. They didn't trust Ashley. They didn't want Charlene to trust Ashley. They just wanted Ashley out of her life. But Charlene is an adult, and at the end of the day, she made the decision to allow Ashley to come back into her home. And sadly, her family just had to accept that because it was her home and it was how she was making money at the end of the day as well. So what would happen is Ashley would have this entire room for himself, and he would be the only person with a key and a lock to get his place. Charlene wanted nothing to do with it. She didn't want any questions about stolen stock, stolen money, and she didn't want to be involved in that. And she said to Ashley, you keep yours to yourself and I'll keep mine to myself. We don't interact these businesses at all. We're just on the same property. So it's an important note that Ashley was the only person who had a key to this padlock. We've given a bit of a background, and now we're going to get into the absolutely horrific crime that took place at Charlene's house. So as I mentioned earlier, Ethan was Charlene's eldest son. He at the time had a girlfriend, and he also had a newborn or fairly young child at the time. Ethan would also from time to time work for Ashley at the tuck shop or work for his mom selling the takeaways out of the house. So he was also on the property, and they had a vehicle that they would share for both of the jobs. But then Ashley approached Ethan, and he asked Ethan to take him and one of his employees to go and fetch some fish because they wanted to braai or barbecue this fish later in the day. So this all took place on the 11th of July. So Ashley, Ethan, and Ashley's employee then all headed in the bakkie or the pickup truck, and they then headed out to go and get some fish. They then come home around 8 p.m. and Ashley then locks up the tuck shop. Ethan was then speaking to his mom while Ashley was locking up, and he said that he and his girlfriend are going out and they're going to take their baby with them. And Charlene said, can't I have the baby for the night? Everyone is left. All of Charlene's children either went out with friends, and Charlene wanted some company, so she asked Ethan to babysit his child for the night. So this child, like I said, was fairly young. They were still being fed with the bottle, and it seemed like they were unable to crawl or walk at the time, but pretty young. So by 9 p.m. at night, the house was quiet. The tuck shop was locked up. Charlene was then in the house with the baby alone. Then on Monday, the 12th, so yesterday was the 11th, and then Monday the 12th at around 10 a.m. in the morning, Ashley then comes knocking on Ethan's door, and he wakes Ethan and his girlfriend up, and he says to Ethan, can you come back with me to your mom's house because she's not answering when I knock on the door. So Ethan gets up, he gets dressed, and he heads with Ashley to his mom's house. He needed to pick up his child anyway, so he thought that he would do this at the same time. Now, knowing what we will know later, I can't imagine the conversation that was happening between Ashley and Ethan at the time. And I think Ethan, thinking back on it, he's probably like, this guy just completely deceived me the entire time. So Ethan and Ashley then rock up to the house, and he's knocking on the door, he's knocking on the windows, he's peeping in, and he can't see his mom anyway, but he can hear his baby scream crying. So because Ethan is worried about his mom but also worried about his baby, he then remembers that there's this window at the back that he can climb through, which he's probably done plenty of times before. But he goes through this window and he's walking through the eerily quiet house besides the baby crying. And he's walking around and he finds his child lying on the bed all alone, and it looks like the baby was put in the middle of the bed, but the bed wasn't made up, so it looks like someone flung open the duvet and the baby was in the middle of the bed. So Ethan then picks up baby, and now him and his child are walking through the house. He's still looking for his mom. The baby's screaming and he's trying to find his mom at the same time. So he's calling out, "Mom, where are you?" And then he walks into the lounge area, and as he walks into the lounge, he notices these pools of blood on the floor. And when he's looking at the blood on the floor, he then looks up and he finds his mom hanging from one of the beams in the lounge. Now Ethan is stuck between a rock and a hard place. He has his baby screaming here, obviously I assume hungry, but his mom is hanging from a rope. So he then walks towards his mom, and as he's about to touch her, he just lightly touches her, and the rope seems to snap and she falls to the ground. As she falls to the ground, Ethan absolutely loses it. He screams. He's saying to Ashley, "My mom, help, help." Ashley then comes screaming through the door. He pushes his way into the house, and he then sees his Charlene, who he had now rekindled a relationship with, and he then starts screaming, "Charlene, my wife," and everyone is just screaming. It's absolute chaos. The neighbors come through, they call an ambulance, they call the police, and the house is then shut off and people are told to leave. So while the tape is being put around the house, police are then starting to look around. Someone calls Alexa, who is one of Charlene's sisters, and she then gets this absolutely horrific call. She drops everything and she then heads to Charlene's house right away. And as she parks her car, she gets out of the door and she sees Ashley in the corner of her eye, and she walks straight up to a police officer and says, "That man tried to kill my sister back in 2012. You need to look at him. He's the main suspect." And she just walks straight past the police officer, and she wants to now see her sister. So the police officer who was in charge of the case assured Charlene's sister Alexa that he would look into it, and he was aware of the previous 2012 and 2011 case. When the police officer then entered the home, he immediately noticed and looked at the scene and concluded to himself that this was not a suicide. It had been staged. The police officer would obviously need to prove this, but from his years of experience, he knew that this was not a suicide. Charlene, firstly, had clearly been beaten around her head and face area. Not only that, but there was a massive pool of blood just outside the lounge door, and were clear drag marks from the pool of blood to where Charlene's body was found. And I mean, it doesn't take a lot, but generally someone who wants to take their own life possibly would not beat themselves first, lie in the pool of blood, and then drag themselves to where the beam is or whatever they wanted to use, throw the rope over, and then hang themselves. But also what the police officer noticed was that where Charlene was first found, there was no chair or anything near her that would indicate that she was able to get up there first to do it, if that made any sense. So the police officer's looking around, and he also notices that there's all these sweets and stuff from the tuck shop, milk and everything lying on the floor. So he looks through the door at the tuck shop, and he then notices on the gate that there's this big gap where a padlock he assumed is supposed to be, because there were markings where something was going in and out of. So the police officer's now looking around, and he's like, okay, where is this padlock? Because he assumed that if they had tried to break into the tuck shop or through this gate, that they would have just discarded the padlock, because why would they take that with them? Because he's now looking for it for fingerprints or anything like that, but he could not find this padlock. He also noticed that there was no forced entry to the front door. So just like Ethan had done before, he assumed that the person who had burgled and potentially murdered Charlene came through the window, just like Ethan had done when he found his mother. The team of officers who were at the crime scene also noticed that Charlene's phone was missing, her laptop, and some other electronics in the house. So where the plot thickens even more was generally in a small town, people know you, people know your business. And remember Ethan, Charlene's son. So Ethan went to one of his closest friends, one of his confidants, and started to speak to him, just needed to speak to someone about what he had seen, and was obviously incredibly traumatized by finding his mother. But one of the friends that Ethan went to, his friend's name was Manfred, and Manfred and Ethan were inside Manfred's house. So Ethan and him are talking, they're getting quite close, they're getting quite deep in conversation. And then Manfred's brother overhears the conversation, and he comes into the room and he's like, Ethan, I'm so sorry to hear this. And he's generally shocked and horrified and really upset about what he heard. And Manfred's brother is named Ashley. And this Ashley was the Ashley that was employed by Ashley right in the beginning in 2011, when he first asked this Ashley to murder his wife. So Ashley, Manfred's brother, his heart starts to sink, and he had an inkling right in the back of his mind that he knew what had happened. Then a couple of days later, Ethan needed to go back to the house to get some paperwork in order to wind up the estate and to get those kind of things ready for him and his family. Ethan needed to speak to the police officer who was in charge of the case, as it was still an active crime scene. So Ethan and the police officer then headed back to his mom's house, and they noticed that the padlock that they were looking for at the crime scene a couple days earlier was perfectly back in its spot. So a photo was taken of the padlock, and Ethan confirmed that that was always the padlock that was there. He noticed this because he worked at the tuck shop, and he knew what it looked like because he was there at openings and he was there at closings. And he also knew exactly what it looked like because of the markings on this padlock. So while Ethan and the police officer were at the home taking photos of the padlock, simultaneously, the pathologist was getting their findings ready, and sadly, it confirmed that Charlene's death was not suicide. When the pathologist was done with their findings, they noticed that the ligature marks on Charlene's neck were very suspicious of a suicide. Yes, the rope was used, and yes, the rope was used to hang her, but it was used post-mortem. So when the person had thrown the rope over the beam and pulled Charlene, she had already passed by that point. The pathologist also noticed that the ligature marks from the rope first used to strangle her. So someone had first strangled her to death with the rope. And the reason that he knew this was because of the angle and the bruising on her neck from the rope. So it looked like someone was kind of at her height or slightly taller than her that was pulling the rope really tightly. And obviously when they then threw the rope over the beam, this pulled the rope at a very high angle that was different from it being kind of straight when this person was strangling her. Charlene had also been horrifically beaten around the face and around her body. The police also found that Charlene's phone had been used soon after her murder by a close friend of Ashley October, because he was the first number that was dialed from Charlene's phone after she had been murdered. Ashley did not answer, but someone definitely called him. Police then did their tracing on the phone, and they found that the person who Charlene's phone was being used by was one of Ashley's employees. This employee said that he didn't know that it was Charlene's phone. He said that he found it in the road, and then he picked it up, he started using it, and by the time that he figured it out that it was Charlene's, he felt too embarrassed because of what was happening in the area, that if he came forward with her phone, that he would be found guilty of a murder, and so he just kept it. So he was then arrested on the spot. And while his trial was waiting to take place, there were talks about him potentially getting bail. And one of the first people to sign the petition to not get him any bail was Ashley October. He would also come to rallies and marches that was happening in the area, and he would drive around in his car showing his support that this guy should not be let on bail. Then, just days after Charlene Jooste's funeral, Ashley October was arrested because this employee of Ashley's had a change of heart and basically said that if he's going down, Ashley's coming with him. So this man said, well, if I'm going to jail for a long time, I might as well be honest, because what's the point? So the employee of Ashley who was arrested said before Charlene's murder, when he was working with Ashley October, Ashley apparently approached him and asked him to kill his ex-wife. He promised him large amounts of money, but Ashley's employee refused. He said that he knew Charlene too well and he had never committed murder before, and he was not able to commit such a crime. Doesn't this sound exactly like what he had asked all past employees? I'll give you the money. Can you do this? We have a big life insurance policy. You know, your job's on the line. You need to do this. And also, this employee of Ashley had a substance issue. Ashley then said to his employee that you must make the murder look like a suicide, and he can take exactly what he wants from the tuck shop and just make sure that you mess it up a lot. A murder looks like a suicide and that you make the crime scene look like a robbery. Ashley didn't care what he took, how much he messed up the area, because he would just claim from insurance. At first, this employee, just like the other employees, didn't think that Ashley was serious about murdering his wife. But Ashley kept going on and asking questions. Why hasn't it been done? Why aren't you doing anything? You need to get this done. This man also felt that he was going to lose his job if he didn't do what Ashley asked him to do. So the night before Charlene was murdered, Ashley asked again and he kept asking. So then he decided, okay, fine. At midnight that night, he then headed to Ashley's house and he waited for Ashley to come outside. Ashley then handed him the keys to the padlock and surgical gloves, and the two then headed to Charlene's house. Then Ashley and his employee then climbed through the window to gain access to Charlene's house. When they were inside, Ashley's employee went straight to the tuck shop and started to unlock the padlock with the keys that Ashley had given him. Once inside, he then started throwing everything to the ground and filling up a box of what he wanted as well. But he was throwing everything around, making it look like a robbery, taking some cash, and when he then turned around, Ashley came around the corner and dropped Charlene's cell phone into the box that his employee was filling up with all the things that he wanted. At the same time, he then heard Charlene screaming and saying, "Get the F out of my house." So Ashley's employee then panicked and started to run outside of the house because he was absolutely terrified that this was going to escalate. Ashley's employee then ran away without letting Ashley follow him, and he ran into the night with Charlene's phone and the money and snacks that he had taken from the tuck shop. Sadly, the next day, Ashley's employee then heard apparently that Charlene had taken her own life, and he felt absolutely guilty because he knew deep down what had happened. But by Ashley's employee saying all of this, Ashley was obviously arrested, and his employee then agreed to testify against Ashley. However, his employee did not get off unscathed. He was charged with housebreaking, with the intent to rob a house and rob the house with aggravating circumstances, housebreaking with intent to rob and murder, and robbery with aggravated circumstances, attempted murder, and attempting to defeat the ends of justice. Ashley's employee pleaded guilty to attempted murder because he understood that even though he didn't lay a hand on Charlene, he played a role in how it all ended and he didn't call the police. Ashley October pleaded not guilty for all of the same charges, as well as an additional charge to rob and murder and the conspiracy to rob and murder. The men who Ashley approached in 2011 and 2012 also took the stand and spoke about how Ashley approached them years ago. Ethan then testified about the horror of finding his mother's body and how weirdly Ashley behaved and how strange it was that he didn't show any emotion after his ex-wife's discovery. Ashley had been well aware that Charlene was going to be home alone the night that Ethan's daughter was home with her, and he knew that she was babysitting, also the only person with the key to the padlock. So in 2012, the judge found Ashley October guilty on all charges, and his employee was sentenced to 15 years in prison for his role in the murder. Ashley October apparently showed no remorse for what he had done, and he felt it absolutely fitting to rob his children of their mother, and not only rob his children of their mother, but traumatize Charlene's children, having to find her body in the home. The judge in this case also felt that SAPS, or the South African Police Services, had a role to play in Charlene's murder as well. The judge also bashed SAPS for not taking the case seriously in 2011 and 2012, when people came forward to say that Charlene was going to be murdered. So overall, Ashley October was handed down a life sentence for the murder of his ex-wife, and an additional 45 years for robbery and all the other charges. In 2046, when he is 64 years old, he will be eligible for parole. So that was quite the insane case and incredibly upsetting. But let me know what you think of this case down below. I do think that Ashley had obviously planned this for a while. He planned this a decade ahead already, and maybe him rekindling or trying to rekindle things with his ex-wife, getting closer, maybe he thought that the plan would eventually come back and someone would definitely murder his wife for him. However, that night when his employee went with him into the house and didn't do anything, I think that Ashley maybe just had enough, and he thought, if no one's going to do it, then I'm just going to have to do it. I assume that Charlene and Ashley got into some sort of altercation inside the house, because when Ashley's employees said that she was shouting, "Get out of my house," I assume she was scared, she was angry, she was trying to protect herself and the baby. But who knows? Let me know what you think of this case down below and what you think. I hope that you all are staying safe. I hope you have a wonderful week further, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.